Today we are starting a new series. We're going to be looking through over the summer, so the next 10 or so weeks. 10 weeks. There are a couple breaks there, but we're going to be looking at parables that Jesus shared during his time on his earthly ministry with his disciples and with the followers. And so we're calling it this Summer Stories series. And we'll talk a little bit. I'll give a little bit of a primer on what a parable is here in a moment, but we're going to look at a parable in Matthew, and it's known as if you grew up in church or you have a Bible, it's often known as the parable of the unmerciful servant. And it deals with forgiveness. That's the theme. And in my, so if I think back in my, for 10 years, I suppose, 10 or so years of being in like pastoral ministry like this. Forgiveness is probably one of the top three topics of conversation that people ask me questions about and want to talk about and talk through. Forgiveness, unforgiveness, how do you forgive? So it's a weighty topic. It's a weighty thing that Jesus himself that Jesus himself tackles, that he addresses. And my hope is that through this parable we can have a better understanding of what forgiveness looks like in your life and in my life. So Matthew 18, verses 21 to 35. If you brought a Bible, you're welcome to follow along that way. The words are also going to be up here on the screen. So let's see here. This is Matthew recording the story. So he says, "Then Peter, one of the disciples, came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?' Jesus answered, 'I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, or some translations read 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold. Some translations read 10,000 talents. It's a significant amount. We'll talk about that. 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children, all that he had, be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him, the king. 'Be patient with me,' he begged, 'and I will pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity, or compassion is probably a better word there, on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants, so a peer, who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. 'Pay back what you owe me,' he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay it back.' But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt," which makes perfect sense. If someone has to pay money, put him in jail. I don't know. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. 'You wicked servant,' he said, 'I canceled all the debts of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?' In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Summer Stories, a journey through the parables. let me just sort of, let's get a framework for what a parable is. A parable is a story with intent. And what I mean by that is it is a story with the intention to either stir up some questions that we might have or questions that we don't have that get stirred up. They are they are intended to increase our level of self-awareness about where we are, where our heart is, what is our posture towards people and to others. They also these stories are intended to get us to act, to do something. That we're not just left like in philosophy where you just kind of think about something and think about it more and more. The parable is actually intended to get you now to go do something about what you've just heard. And the reason that parables are effective or that they work really well is because they use what's known as indirect communication. What we mean by that is, so direct communication is actually what we read in the very beginning. So when Peter says to Jesus, hey, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister? 7 times? And Jesus gives a very direct answer, direct communication. 7, no, 77. 7 times 7. There's nothing wrong with direct communication. However, what tends to happen with direct communication, and maybe you've been a recipient of this, is that often when people communicate to us very directly, we become defensive. Direct answers become, we feel a little bit of hostility and maybe a hesitancy. Indirect communication is sort of this back window way into getting to our hearts and our habits that help us that sort of lower our defensive posture. And that's why parables were so effective, and they've been used outside of the Bible. They've been used throughout history. Honestly, we still use them today. We call them stories or illustrations. The reason that Jesus used parables so frequently is this quote actually that comes from this gentleman right here, Klyne Snodgrass. Let's just get it out. Laugh it out, friends. Get it out of your system. It's a nerdy name. I get it. But this book here, Stories with Intent, is an incredible book. If you want a book that gets into all the parables, most of the parables that Jesus speaks on, but helps you understand the cultural setting, the historical setting, where these illustrations come from, I would highly recommend this book. It is a bit academic, I will say. It's a dense book. It's a heavy book, but it's a great book, and I will be referencing it throughout this series. I have a copy, so if anyone wants to borrow it, you have to just give it back to me. But this is kind of how Klyne Snodgrass, how he describes parables. They function as a lens that allows us to see the truth and to correct distorted vision. The parables, they awaken insight, they stimulate the conscience, they move us to action. One of my favorite quotes from him about this, they seek to lead people into the action that the gospel deserves and the kingdom demands. Let me say that again. So the parables seek to lead people into the action that the gospel deserves and the kingdom demands. So they are... parables are, if we want to be a gospel-centered faith community, if we want to be a gospel-centered body of believers, a gospel-centered Jesus-like church, the parables are where we should find ourselves to grow in that. So the parable that we looked at this morning, or we heard from, is the unforgiving servant. And again, the theme of this is forgiveness. It is the main theme here. Now, I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to repeat it at the end. What this parable isn't saying. This parable isn't saying that you are a doormat, that you get to be treated with disrespect, that as a Christian, you get to put on the posture of this passive person that gets abused or neglected. That is not what this parable is saying. And I need to say that from the very beginning, because historically, this parable, this story, has been used for that very way. It has been used to silence people who are suffering. It has been used to minimize someone's trials or the abuse they have suffered or the neglect they have gone through. That's not what this parable is saying. So I want to just make a very blanket statement from the very beginning. That's not what this parable is saying. If you are a victim of that, whether you are a victim of a relationship where you have experienced abuse or neglect, where your hardships have been minimized, and this passage has maybe been the thing that people use, I wanted to say I'm sorry, and I just speak against that, because that's not biblical. That's not Jesus. If you're in a situation like that now, and you don't have anyone to talk to, you can come and talk to me about that. So, all right. So that's what this parable isn't saying. What this parable is saying, though, or what it might be saying to us, is forgiveness is a process. That if we are going to seek forgiveness, and I take it a step further, reconciliation to restore a relationship with someone, there's a process that we need to go through. And within that process, the bedrock of that process is a relationship. You got to have a relationship with the person, with the individual, if you want to seek out some sort of forgiveness and reconciliation. And we'll talk about what that looks like, practically speaking, in just a moment here. But the big idea for today, so if there's one thing that I hope you all will leave with today is that forgiveness requires a change. Forgiveness requires a change in us. Forgiveness requires a change in the person we are seeking reconciliation and forgiveness with. Forgiveness requires a certain change in our posture and in how we view the world around us. So, but first, let's talk about our story. So, Peter's idea of forgiveness. This story, this passage in the parable opens with Peter asking Jesus, "Hey, how many times should I forgive my brother and sister if they do me wrong?" If I were to ask you that question, what would you say, honestly, how many times would you forgive someone who wronged you? Anyone care to share? Like, okay, I got one, so we go, right? Anyone, is 5 times too many, maybe? No? Yes? 6? 7? I mean, what's your limit? You don't have to answer, but if you've ever been wronged by someone, if anyone has ever hurt you, there's going to come a point to where you limit that, right? Peter is asking this question to Jesus, and he's asking it in a context that would have actually sounded pretty crazy. What I mean by that is that Jesus, when he says to Jesus, asks him, "Can I forgive 7 times? Is that enough?" Historically, in Jewish culture, in ancient Israel society, 3 times was actually considered a generous amount of forgiveness to give someone. For the same wrongdoing, if you forgive them 3 times, that was considered generous. That was going pretty far. When Peter says 7, he's sort of almost doubling +1 what the traditional understanding of forgiveness was. That would have actually been, we would probably describe that as like pretty extreme. That's excessive. Like, you forgave someone 7 times, that's double our required amount. That's a lot. It's a lot, Peter. The response that Jesus gives when he says, no, 7 times 7, Peter, 77 times, it's really direct sort of communication. Okay, if we were there in the first century, you would have heard this, this audible gasp, because that is outrageous. That is wild. That is significantly more than what anyone could imagine at that time. It's this absurd amount of forgiveness that Jesus tells Peter. And again, if we're there, that's what we're doing. Like, oh man, this is a lot. And my hunch, this is my sanctified imagination, so bear with me here. Jesus, if there was an audible gasp of the crowd, Jesus thinks to himself, you know what? This seems like a great time to give a little story, to give a parable about what I'm talking about. And so he begins to tell this story, and I'll do my best to retell the story. There is a servant and there is a master or a king. And the servant owes this king, his master, a significant amount of money. Depending on your translations, 10,000 bags of gold, 10,000 talents. Let's break that down here. How much are we talking about? I am not a math major, so I hope I did my math right here. I also used ChatGPT and 2 commentaries to double check my math. So let's see how we did here. So how much are we talking about? When Matthew refers to, Jesus says 10,000 bags of gold or a talent. So 1 talent in this time in first century Palestine would have been 6,000 denarii. So 1 denarii, though, equaled 1 day's wage. So what Jesus is saying is that this servant owes his master 60 million denarii, 60 million days of work, which comes out to 164,000-ish years of work. That's a lot, right? I'm not a math major. I just want to make sure. That's a lot. Again, when Jesus shares this, people are like, "Oh man, that's hyperbole. That's way too extreme. How in the world is he going to pay this off?" And so the story continues. Jesus says, so the man, he can't pay it. And so the master says, well, I'm going to sell you and your whole family, and then I'm going to sell all of your possessions into slavery until you can pay back that absurd amount that you simply won't be able to pay back. Now, some of us this might sound a bit extreme. Like, that's a pretty hefty price. However, in Roman culture especially, slavery debt was a way to pay back your debt. If you owed money to someone, so let's say hypothetically, right, I owe Jeff money and I can't pay it back, Jeff could take me to court and say, all right, until Ben pays me back whatever I owe him, I'm going to work for Jeff for free until I can pay him back. Once I pay it back, I have earned my freedom. I have earned my release. But again, we're talking maybe a couple months worth of work, not 164,000-ish years of work. And so the man, realizing this, falls to his knees. He falls to his knees, and what I love about this story, or what I find interesting, and honestly I didn't really catch it until this week, is that the man falls to the knees of his master and he asks and begs for patience. He says, be patient with me until I can pay it off. He doesn't ask for the debt to be canceled or erased. He just says, be patient with me. Give me a little time. I can move some money around. I'll see what I can do, but I will start paying you back. And the king, the master, responds with compassion. Again, some translations read pity. The word actually used there in Greek and in Hebrew is the word compassion. If you were here a few weeks ago, we talked about the compassion of God. It's that same word. The master exercises a level of compassion, and not only he doesn't give patience. He doesn't say, all right, I'll give you some time. He goes above and beyond and says, I'm going to cancel the debt altogether. I'm going to forget that you owe me this extraordinary amount of money, and you're free to go. Now, what I would say, if the story ended there, it would seem like, man, and we thought, okay, this servant now probably leaves the king's palace, his master's house, and he is elated because he is free. He doesn't have to worry about his family getting thrown into slavery. He doesn't have to worry about losing his possessions. This has got to be the best spot. But Jesus continues the story, and he says, this man, this servant, he now leaves, and when he leaves his master's house, he sees a friend of his who owes him 100 silver coins. For comparison, 100 silver coins was probably around 100 denarii. And again, 1 denarii is 1 day's wages. So this man sees a friend of his who owes him about 100 days worth of work, so a little over 3 months of work, and he demands him pay that back. And if we read the story slowly and carefully, we see this second servant, this friend, does the exact same thing. Verse 29 says he falls to his knees and he begs for patience. And this servant does not reciprocate the compassion that he just received, and he chokes the man and demands that he gives him back everything he owes, and that if he doesn't, he's going to throw him into jail, which again, it's hard to make a living when you can't make a living. The king hears about this and is furious. And the story ends by saying that the king will have this man, the unmerciful servant, now thrown into jail and to be tortured. And then Jesus concludes by saying, this is how my heavenly Father will treat those who do not forgive others within their heart. So I want to bring this to, let's try to make this in a contemporary context so we can sort of understand what, if I could do a contemporary version of this parable. I want us to imagine for a moment, right, someone racks up $10 million in debt. So bad investments, back taxes, credit card debt, financing, you name it, right? They have $10 million in debt. And they can't pay this back. But the debt collector calls. Anyone ever got one of them phone calls before? They call, they text now too. And they say, you got to owe up. And if you don't pay up, if you don't start making payments, we're going to garnish your wages. We're going to repo your car. We're going to foreclose on your home. We're going to get our money some way. And this person falls to their knees or on the phone, begs and pleads to just be patient with them. Be patient with me. I will pay you back. Just please be patient with me. I'll move some money around. I'll see what I can do. And that debt collecting company says, you know what? What if we just call it even Stevens? Forgiven. No, you don't owe anything else anymore. It'd be like someone, imagine the bank calling you and saying, hey, you know what? We were looking at our books. We had a pretty good year. We've just decided that your home, your mortgage, we're just going to pay it. We're going to forgive that debt. We're going to pay that off. If you got a car loan, your car loan's paid off. Maybe there's someone in this room who can relate to my situation. It'd be like one of the 15 student loan providers that I have a tumultuous relationship with over the last 2 decades would call me and say, you know what, Ben, it's the year Jubilee, and we just decided we're just going to forgive you of all that educational loan that you took on. So let's pause here for a moment, friends. If that was you, how would you feel? What feelings, just imagine that. What do you feel right now? If I imagine it, I literally feel lighter. I feel excited. I feel an immense amount of joy. However, let's say, I'll use myself as the example. Let's say you hear that, hey, Ben got his student loans forgiven. Isn't that amazing? The year Jubilee for student loan providers, and they just felt like forgiving his loans. But you know what was weird? Is I saw him at Meijer the other day, and Craig was there. And Craig wanted a 2-liter of Mountain Dew. And he couldn't, and he forgot his wallet, and Ben happened to be next to him, and it was so weird. Craig looked at Ben and was like, hey, Ben, could you You want to float me 5, cuz? And Ben was like, come on, sorry, Craig, I can't help you right now. Oh, that would probably change your perception of me, I would imagine. Because all of a sudden, I'm not passing on the same amount of compassion and grace to Craig that I've received from others. That's what this story is about. But it's more than just about money. It's more than just about some sort of financial issue. What Jesus is ultimately talking about is he's actually talking about our sin. He's talking about the relationship that we have with God. That we, because of our fallen and broken nature, we have this insurmountable debt that we owe to God. That the way that we interact with others, the way we treat the world around us, the way we worship things other than God, you name it, all those things, the things that we do to accumulate some amount of debt against God keep adding and adding and adding, and we can't pay it back. And so, God, at some point says, the way you're going to pay for this is with your life. Because you can't live perfectly, and as a perfect God, I can't have you affect my perfection. So I just can't, you got to keep your distance from me. And we fall to our knees and beg God to be patient with us. God, just give me a chance. Give me some time. Let me move some priorities around. Let me try to clean up my life a little bit. Just be patient with me. I'll do better. I would need so many extra fingers and toes to count all the times I've told God in my life, I'll be better next time. And yet it doesn't seem to make a difference. It doesn't really make up for that debt. And so what happens is Jesus steps into the picture. Jesus is fully human. He's fully God. He's the only person to live a spotless, sinless life, as the Bible tells us. And he stands in between us and God and says, I'll pay the debt. I'll pay the price. I'll take the punishment. I'll deal with the consequences. And in return, Ben gets to have a restored relationship. Ben gets to be at the feet of God the Father again. Gets to be in the Master's house. That's the story of the gospel. That's what this story is actually getting to. But in the same way that financially, if I don't pass on the grace and compassion that someone has shown me to Craig, if I don't do that spiritually or relationally, then I've messed up. Then I just have not understood what has been given to me. And that's ultimately what Jesus is talking about. He says the kingdom of heaven is like this. He's talking about what it means like to live with him in charge, with his Father in charge. And so what he says is, if you want to be a part of my Father's kingdom, then you have got to be a person of forgiveness and grace and compassion. Now, again, what this means is that these things only happen in a relationship, and they do not give people license to treat you like a doormat. This is not by any means a message that saying that if you're going to be a part of God's kingdom, you just need to suck it up and take it. That's not what this is. Because actually this passage is a part of a larger story in Matthew 18 where Jesus is talking about relationships within the kingdom. That if you are going to be a part of God's kingdom, if you're going to be a part of God's world in which he rules and you are part of that city, and our citizenship is part of that, then we are called to be a people that seek towards forgiveness and reconciliation. It's if I could say it simply, it's being people that substitute compassion for justice, that substitute mercy for revenge, which I would say is fairly countercultural to our world today. There's literally a show called Revenge. It's baked into our everyday lives. You got to get them back. So some of you might be like, okay, sounds great, Ben. But there's always a big but somewhere. What about this person that I can't forgive? What about the people in my life that their name, the mention of their name makes my blood pressure rise? Mine is Sally Mae. If you echo the word Sally Mae, which is a student loan provider, well, it used to be, I think they got bought out at some point. You echo that name in my home, you're going to catch some hands because I hate Sally Mae. But it just raises your blood pressure. You say, I don't know how to do this. I can't do this. Okay, well, I hate doing steps, but I think this is helpful. Lewis Smedes, if you don't know him, Lewis Smedes is a Christian ethicist. He's an author, a theologian. He writes a lot about how do we as Christians, as believers, as followers of Jesus, how do we live in the world today? And he wrote a book called The Art of Forgiving. There you go. But he says there are 3 levels to forgiveness, and I really thought these are helpful for me when I think through the process of forgiveness. The first step is to rediscover the humanity. What he means by that is that often when we are hurt or harmed by someone else, we dehumanize them. We categorize them as people other than people. They are our enemy, they are our foe, they are our abuser, whatever it may be. And what Lewis Smedes would argue is the first step to forgiveness is to rediscover the humanity in that person. That person, just like me, is created in the image of God. And if they are created in the image of God, they deserve a level of decency and respect because they bear God's image. That's not an easy first step. That's a tough one. However, if you can work your way through that, which potentially could take time, the next step, the next level that Lewis Smedes says is that there needs to be a surrender the right to get even. Now, this is kind of a bummer one because it's kind of fun getting even, right? Don't lie. There's something good about watching someone get what you think they deserve. And Lewis Smedes says, if you're trying to work towards forgiveness, then you got to learn to give that up. You got to be okay with not getting even. The last thing that Lewis Smedes would say is that then, if you can do those 2 things, the third level is revising your feelings. Now, I think this is where, if we're talking about a relationship, this is where the relationship part of forgiveness really takes place, because when we revise our feelings, when we change the way that we see this person and interact with this person, it also means that if we end up interacting with them, we have to be okay with voicing to them what they've done to us and how things will change if we're going to keep the relationship. It's revising your feelings. So it's letting go of, I'm not going to get even with you. But I'm going to tell you right now, if we're going to be in a relationship moving forward, these things have to change. So my feelings for you might mean we're going to have to rebuild some trust. We're going to have to work towards this relationship. Lewis Smedes, in this book, he has this quote. Ultimately, what he says, the bedrock, the foundation of this is to recognize where we are in the story, which is we are forgiven people. And he says that nothing enables us to forgive like knowing in our hearts that we have been forgiven. Now, maybe I think Lewis Smedes is referring to not just a personal relationship with others, but it's also a relationship with God. We have been forgiven by God through his son, Jesus. Uh, I think being a parent has taught me significantly about what this means in the sense of what does it mean to seek forgiveness. Again, the amount of times I've had to apologize to my wonderful 5-year-old, and it has taught me the value of hearing, "I forgive you, Dad." Oh man, life changing. But it also means that our relationship continues to grow and mature, but it takes work. And Jesus, when he is sharing this story, what's kind of fascinating, it's towards the end of the Gospel of Matthew. It's also getting near the end of Jesus' earthly ministry, that Jesus, in a way, was sort of telling the future about what his life would look like. That Jesus tells this story about what forgiveness looks like to an extreme measure, and then shortly thereafter, Jesus would put it into practice, because there will come a moment where he is hanging on a cross. Well, even before he is nailed to a cross, he is standing before a crowd of his peers, his fellow citizens, Jewish people just like himself, who he has spent 3 or so years caring for, showing compassion and grace and mercy to, and healing their diseases, and bringing an end to sicknesses, to curing their paralyzed bodies, and bringing sight to their blind eyes, and stepping into messy situations to restore relationships. That same crowd that Jesus spent time with would soon turn on him and start screaming, "Crucify him. Kill him." And that even as Jesus is nailed to the cross and he's hanging there, there's 2 other people next to him, and in that moment, one of these other criminals, someone who doesn't deserve forgiveness for the wrong they've done, looks to Jesus and says, "Remember me in your kingdom. Forgive me." That one of his closest friends, Peter, during those most trying moments of the life of Jesus, when pressed, "Hey, Peter, don't you know Jesus?" Peter's response would be, "I don't know him." He says, "I don't know him 3 times. After Jesus is crucified, dies, he's buried. Spoiler alert, he comes back to life. And in his resurrected body, he comes to Peter, who has denied him 3 times prior, and he says, "Peter, it is you that will start my church." It's reconciliation. That's forgiveness. I can imagine Peter probably felt a significant amount that he owed to Jesus, and yet Jesus forgave him. Now, we are not Jesus. We do not have an infinite amount of grace and mercy to give others, but we know Jesus. And because we know Jesus, or if you are here this morning and you have a relationship with Jesus, then you know what it means to be forgiven. You know what it means to experience the grace and mercy of him, and what it means to have a restored relationship with God. And because of that, you are part of God's kingdom. It's baked into the process of following Jesus. And if you are part of God's kingdom, then you, like me, are called to be people of forgiveness. And so we will model that here at Rise Up Church as often as we can. What I love about this idea of forgiveness and the relational aspect of it is that it falls right within one of our core values here at Rise Up, which to me is belonging and even partnering. That here at Rise Up Church, we walk alongside people and we learn to do life with people, which means that there might be people who don't always see eye to eye with me, and may upset me and say things that hurt me. But my job as being part of God's kingdom is to seek reconciliation and forgiveness. It's a picture of what the gospel is. It's a picture to our countercultural world. So as we wrap up our time here, friends, so conclusion and some takeaways. Forgiveness requires a change in you. If you're here this morning and you don't know Jesus, you are not a follower of Jesus. That's your initial start. There needs to be a changed relationship between you and God and you and Jesus. If you want to begin that change, that process today, I invite you to come and talk to me when we're done here. Another thing is, forgiveness is not being a doormat. I can't reiterate it enough. You were created in the image of God. You were created and loved by a divine Father, an incredible Creator in God, and you deserve to be treated in that way. And so you are not a doormat. If you are working through forgiveness or you want to start, it is a restorative process. It's restorative not just for the relationship you have with someone, but it's restorative for ourselves. There's a transforming and a restorative nature that happens within us, as well as the people that we are in a relationship with. So a couple things to think about this week, my friends. One is, where do I find myself in this story of the unmerciful servant? What I mean by that is, where are, heaven forbid you say, I'm the guy that I'm the servant that choked out the other one. I hope that's not you. But if you are, what does this story tell you? What does the process of forgiveness look like for me? Those 3 steps, right, that Lewis Smedes mentions in his book, the rediscover the humanity, surrendering the right to get even, revise those feelings. What does that process look like for you? Where are you in that process? The last question, might there be someone who I can show compassion over justice to this week? Let's wrap up this time here in prayer. Our Father in heaven, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for waking us up. I thank you for being a gracious and compassionate God who saw the debt we owed, and though we may not have physically fallen to our knees and begged for patience, we do spiritually and relationally, and your Son is the one that catches us. So thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the perfect life and the perfect work of Jesus. Thank you for the great exchange that happens, that he takes on the fullness of my sin debt, the fullness of what I owe you, and in exchange gives me the fullness of a restored relationship with you. That relationship, Father, is one that I pray that myself and others continues to grow and foster. And so, by your Spirit's power, may it lead and guide us to being a people of forgiveness and reconciliation. In our broken world, a world that is filled with the desires to get even, to get revenge, to make someone else pay, God, let us be different. And may your Spirit do a mighty work in us as we do that. We pray all this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, amen. If you're able to, I invite you to stand. We're going to close out in a song, and then we'll do our benediction.